One of the things, again, it's kind of like the education, is are we using technology to cover up what we should be providing?
Interesting.
So if we actually poured in money, for example, into mental wellness and make sure every single community had a psychologist, a social worker, accessibility, are you telling me people wouldn't want to rather be with a person than a bot?
Welcome back to the fam, y'all. My name is Parker Johnson. To my left, I've got Dr. Lisa Gunderson. To my right, I've got Pamphinette Buisa. Today, we're gonna switch it up a little bit. I feel like this topic is a little bit out of our element, but it's relevant. So we're talking about technology, we're talking about AI, and how it's impacting schools, our everyday life, our lives. I'm curious what y'all thoughts are. I know I have some questions around ethics and what it means to bring AI into our life, but yeah, does anybody want to start us off?
Dr. G. Me? I just heard about this thing called Chat GPT.
That's it, yeah.
Okay.
That's one of them.
I got it. And I was just kind of shocked and stunned by what it can do. And my son was in class, and he's in a careers class, and he's supposed to write an answer to a question. And the kid next to him just plugged the question into the Chat GPT in like 30 seconds and gave him the full answer, and then he just pasted it, put it into the thing, and just sent it off to the teacher. And it was dud. And I'm like, well, I'm not sure that's how that's supposed to go, but what the heck is this thing? And I started getting curious about it. And I know you have some thoughts around ChatGPT in your university, giving you some thoughts.
Well, without necessarily outing myself, but
Yes.
I think it's actually fascinating because, okay, so the person that actually told me about it was one of my friends, my best friend's little brother, and he's in high school.
Yep.
And he was like, do you know anything about ChatGPT? Exactly that like they would plug in an essay saying like, write me an essay on decolonization in El Salvador. And then it writes it out for you. And I thought he was joking, and initially when he told me, I had those like initial concerns about it, about like, it's really scary because in education you're supposed to be learning something, and in a way, the questions in itself that the teachers are giving may not necessarily be stimulating of the mind, so people are just putting it in there, and then like copy and paste, you put it in like a word jumbler, and then submit. And it's kind of, and I think there actually was an email a few weeks ago from the university talking about it, and it's just, I don't know, it makes me nervous because now it's like you don't have to think about certain things, but also it alleviates a lot of these, when it comes to essays. I'm in political science, I'm having to write 12-page essays on things that I feel like I care about, but I have to make sure that I have all these specific things in play that I don't necessarily need to, it's a bit more mindless.
I wasn't a good student when I was in school, so I'm celebrating the little ones in school right now. Go ahead. But the technology doesn't concern me as much as what human beings can do with it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, it's just a tool, and it's being used in all of these different innovative ways. It can detect cancers. It can, not ChatGPT, but AI, the use of AI. It can. One of my coworkers is translating a whole bunch of old journals from his family, older family members.
Oh, that's real talk.
You know what I mean? And I guess the concern, is ethics. I'm like, where do we draw the line? I don't know. It's just, maybe I sound like a boomer right now. Like, I'm seeing some of these things and I'm like, wait.
Yeah.
One of the things to think about, and I'm gonna go back to the ChatGPT for a second. When you look at the idea that you're given an assignment and you could put it into a computer and it could just spit out the answer, is the issue the tool?
Yeah.
Or is the issue how we've constructed, for example, education or the assignment for that to be able to happen? And when I was a professor for so many years, one of the things that I really wanted to make different is making sure the assignment was able to connect with the person. It's a lot easier on my life to give everybody, talk to me about Freud and, do that. But that doesn't do anything. Plus, why do I want to read 40 papers on Freud? Versus, tell me how this issue applies directly to your life and give me examples from your life to make it applicable and real. So in one way, I like that it's out there because I think what it's going to do is force us to rethink what we mean by quote unquote education and not just throwing back up stuff that we feed to you, which I find is a huge, huge problem. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
No, it does.
Yeah.
Did you?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think I remember you were telling me about an assignment that I think it was psychology. What was the class that you were teaching that one of the assignments that you gave, and I was like, I can't believe you asked the students that.
Was that death and dying or sex?
I think it was death and dying.
Okay.
Yeah. What was it? What was it? Can you share?
So one of the assignments that I gave was to ask people to think about how they would like to be remembered when they die. So kind of what would that look like? If you can envision that, what would they say about your life and yourself? And this was, that was a particular assignment that we would do in that course.
And I think having, because that pushes the envelope.
Yeah.
And I think when we talk about reframing education, it gets really mindless when we're not rethinking how we can stimulate these thoughts.
Yeah.
And I think that when we talk about should we fear it? Are they going to take our jobs and all these things? And how are we then pushing the envelope to make people think more, lean into their thoughts, their feelings, so then when they show up to their jobs, it's not well, I did this, it's mindless, I could just copy and paste. Really, you can copy and paste a resume, put it into ChatGPT.
People are doing that.
And it's done.
People are doing that.
Yeah. So I think the more that there's opportunity to
I'm sorry.
That's the thing. It's wild. It's wild.
It's real anymore, man. You still got to show up to the job.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
So Dom, my son, he's a politics major, and I asked him, are you going to use this thing? And he's like, no. And I said, why not? And he said, well, for two reasons. He goes, one, I don't learn anything that way. And he said, two, it's not fun. But that's that ethical piece, right? He's so connected to what he's doing. He wants to learn and he wants to do that. But I think if you think about interviews where we ask people to write essays or college applications write essays, now if the computer can do it, I think we're going to go back to this. So instead, maybe I'll give you an oral exam. Truth. And for the interview, maybe I want to actually see you and be a person again. That's a really interesting space.
That's a good point.
Right?
I think that the use of technology, whether it's our cell phones, whether it's AI or whatever, I get concerned about the quality of our relationships.
Yes.
It just feels like we are struggling to be in community with each other already. And most of the time you see people like this. Before we started this, we were talking about how there's therapy bots.
Yes.
And I know that therapy is very hard to access financially. But in terms of human connection, I wonder how this will evolve in terms of how we're using AI and technology. I think there's a lot of amazing accessibility uses, innovative things that are being built.
Absolutely.
But the everyday connection piece is what I'm curious about.
When you mentioned the therapy bot, one of the things, again, it's kind of like the education, is are we using technology to cover up what we should be providing?
Interesting.
So if we actually poured in money, for example, into mental wellness and make sure every single community had a psychologist, a social worker, accessibility, are you telling me people wouldn't want to rather be with a person than a bot? So instead of, again, there's great things to use about technology, but are we making sure that we're not dealing with a way to just not really have real talk and deal with some real issues? And in our community, like you said, it is important. I mean, the internet, AI, all that allows for us to have communications with each other around the world, but there's nothing that replaces this
Truth.
right here.
Truth.
And the energy and the smiles. And it's not like AI isn't possibly racist and sexist anyway, which
Well,
is
that was-
totally
Which is-
intrinsic.
That was
Okay.
what we're
Yep.
getting into, because you can't be a corporation generating diversity. Come on, man. I still got to walk in the building. Like, I'm going to know very
Yeah,
quickly
truth. That's the
what's
thing.
going on.
I remember seeing, I think I sent it to you today about how one of the AI like companies had like hired like 2 Kenyan laborers and to kind of have like that diversity in the space, and we're paying them like $2 an hour, and they had like essentially talked about it with like Times magazine, like anonymously, just talking about how like, yeah, is with making, so like with AI, it's like machine processing. So whatever we put into it is
what it spits
it's
out.
going to spit out.
Exactly.
So if we're going to, if I'm going to
Exactly.
use it, and it's supposed to articulate my perspective on something, but the people putting in that perspective does not represent who I am, I'm not a part of
Exactly.
even having my perspective used in AI at all. You know, so it's,
Yep.
I think it's a little, that's also where my fear is, specifically with the ethics of it, is that while we do use it, and I also would kind of challenge almost what was said about like, we can't replace it. I think with the presence of AI will also force us to have more of this,
Yes.
because
Hopeful.
we can hopeful.
you know,
Yeah.
I think that like
Yeah.
it's only going to get more and more like as we continue on discovering how far we can use AI, but I also think there will be more and more of that need to like human interaction for that reason, because if I can talk to a therapist through a bot, I also haven't maybe seen a person in a long time, and I may be just craving that, and so that may push us in that direction too.
I hope, and I'm curious about that in terms of the generational thing, right? Like, I come from a generation where we did the whole computer thing, and it took us 10 lines to watch the little thing go, doo, 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 right? I literally learned how to type on a typewriter that went, and the what? Yeah, that's how old I am.
I don't know.
Like, yeah. So what I'm curious about is, you all have kind of grown up with some of this. My
Yeah.
niece is grown up coming into the world with TikTok
True.
and social. I mean, you all saw that kind of evolve. So when you see, it still stuns me when I go into a room and everybody's on their phone. And then I notice that people are timing, and I'm like, are you two talking to each other? Yep, but you're literally across the room. Why don't you just talk
Yeah.
or call instead of texting?
Yeah.
Like, I don't get that part. So I'm just wondering how it is for you all. And in terms of, does it feels like it's overwhelming and people are trying to kind of back up more towards my generation? Like, what is that like?
So I have a few thoughts on this. The first one is that it's stunning how quickly we can learn information, like gain information, and how the algorithm that is designed in some of these applications is so good at figuring you out.
It's wild.
And some of our when I think about the community piece, it's interesting when you look at politics and the way that people vote, the way that people behave. I like to think that all of these movements that come up, whether it's alt-right, super left, there's a need for community. You're finding community.
True.
Yeah, that
How
is
are you?
true.
How are you doing it?
And that's
You're
a
using
human
technology.
instinct. Yep.
But what the algorithm can do, it's not the algorithm's fault. It's the human being who's
Creating it.
this thing.
Yeah.
It will keep feeding you these things that affirm what you believe. And our generation is so malleable, and it's just happening so fast. It's able to just gather people in, whatever your belief is. You're gonna find your pocket.
Yeah.
And it'll just continue to feed you information that affirms this belief, and I think it puts you in an echo chamber. So you're just seeing the same stuff over and over again.
Is that scary to you?
It is, because we're no longer looking outside. I'm looking at the same place all the time for the answers. I don't think that's helpful. I need to know how other people are thinking. And I think that fuels discourse.
Yeah.
Well, you're not a part of my bubble. Like, you're not getting what YouTube is recommending me. You're not getting
True.
what
Yeah,
you know what I
that's
mean?
true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And once you find your community in that, we want relationships. You're going to stay in that, I think. That's just my thinking. I also think that because it's so, we see the way that these kids are growing up with technology, I find it humorous for some of us who haven't grown up with TikTok.
Yeah.
Haven't grown up with some of these, I don't even know.
And I'm curious about, because
It's wild.
I eat it up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I eat it up. Yeah.
There's some of us who are lagging behind. I don't know.
I hear you.
Whether or not we'll even catch up.
True.
I mean, how does that feel for you?
To be honest, I fully eat it up. I love the social media. You will catch me on it 20. So like, I hear you. I totally hear you. I feel for you.
It's like, oh, you poor old
I feel you. I feel you, but I get it. I feel you, but I get it. I think like I also know I am oftentimes in sensory overload, and so like my brain is always thinking. I'm like multitasking. I'm like having a conversation, and I see that I'm wired to like be here but also be elsewhere.
That's so interesting.
And so like that like multitasking brain is, you're always like when I think, because I said in a few episodes before, is like practicing like rest and stillness. And I think that's also a contribution of like social media, is that like I could be on my phone, I could be listening to music, I could be watching something else. I'm constantly in many different places.
So how do you end up resting then if you're always on and feel like if you put it down, unless there's a collective decision, okay, everybody just stop talking for 24 hours. Do you feel like when you put it down, you're missing out? And you need to get, like, how long can you be off before you feel like you're missing out?
Can I just real quick?
Yeah.
I think it's a dopamine lottery.
It is 100%.
It's a steady drip.
Yeah.
It's like it's Vegas on your phone.
On your phone. Well, because they do it. I remember like one of the CEOs of like, I think it was like Facebook, or one of the, either Facebook or TikTok. I can't remember, but they were talking about like what he was saying, how he wouldn't allow his kids to use it or something, or it was actually, they were talking about the creation of the like button, and they're saying about just that dopamine fix of like checking your phone, the notifications. Even if you don't know where your phone is, you kind of panic. I do feel that pretty consistently when I don't have my phone. But I also know that like in most of like being an athlete, I'm never on my phone. I have to be on. I have to be focused. And so, but I also know that being able to multitask, I'm like, if I'm thinking about it, like the sport, I'm on the field of play. I can be able to be here, see what's happening field of view. So I kind of operate in that space anyways, of like being high functioning under pressure, but also being here connected, also being watched and perceived. So like, I'm kind of naturally wired that way.
So you're always on?
Yes, which brings up that difficulty with rest. Yes. And I think that like, for me is like, I've been trying to introduce like meditating more, or like, one of my friend Liz, who's behind the camera, actually would be like, we'll go ice bathing. So like finding active ways to be in my body, like being an athlete, you're usually doing that, but being intentional with like, I'm sitting here, I'm putting my phone away, I'm listening to the present. And I think that that's kind of like the hard thing about having your phone and like AI is navigating how do you be present.
And that is, I think, my concern, because it's no surprise that the youth of today, and we'll be talking about youth mental health in a few episodes, but they have higher levels of anxiety and depression, and they now can actually attach it to the smartphone, right? Like, people are always on. And I'm just wondering, because I heard a young teen talk about, I wish I could put it down. Like, we have that, but if everybody could do it, then we'd be good.
True.
So I'm just wondering, are we going to get to a point where, like, you all put it down?
That's a social contract.
No, I don't think so. Because there's a dependency that's been created through it. How many phone numbers can you remember right now?
Truth.
Can you remember your home address from two homes ago if you've moved? Like, there's so much dependency in this.
And
you
it's
can upload,
everything.
It's everything. 2 clicks, I can pull up every single card I need to tap.
Yeah.
I went into Whole Foods when I was visiting my friend in LA, and they had the debit machine. And instead of a phone symbol, it was the palm of the hand.
Oh,
wow.
no.
I looked at my friend.
That's wild.
Oh,
I'm
no.
like,
See,
bro,
I
what's
watch too many like criminal murder mysteries, and they're like, they come and arrest you. Parker Johnson, it's like, what are you talking about? We have your fingerprint, but I didn't go nowhere. They take that. I don't trust that mess. Your eye scan,
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. I mean, my mom, She literally never used an ATM card.
Hey.
Right? She was just like, I need to go into the bank. I need to see my cash. She had money
cash.
like, I'm kidding, like under the mattress and in the, she goes, I don't understand. What is this card? How it, you know what I'm saying? No joke. And so she also, though, was so kind of computer phobic. She never got to enjoy the beauties of it, where my father was the opposite. So when I was living in Spain, he could email me and stuff like that. Mom can't turn on the computer, right? And it's not because she doesn't know how, it's just so, it just doesn't register that way. So while I'm interested in TikTok, cool, but I don't need to be on social media. And I understand that there's stuff that I'm probably missing, but I also feel like I don't know how to catch that up, because it just seems like you have to constantly be on, right?
It's
It's
a lot.
It's so much.
Yeah, there's I remember a story when I was still in high school. It was late high school, and this is where when I had a moment of thinking, oh my goodness, this is wild. And I went to go search something up on Google, and I automatically typed in Facebook. Like I was, and then
autopilot.
I was like, oh nah.
Yeah.
Where's the encyclopedia? Like, let me get out of here.
You know what though? The fact that you can Google something quickly doesn't mean you know something. And that's one of the pieces for me, that you have generations of people who think just because they can Google the information quickly, it means they know stuff. And there is something to the fact of just living life. And certain things that just come with time. And being able to kind of respect and honor those spaces, I think, becomes really important, which is why it's kind of like using a calculator. I know how to add, and when you get to the point where the computer is doing so much for you that you can't register it yourself, like I can't spell anymore because I use spell check, right? Like autocorrect. It's one of those things where we have to figure out how to be able to still do what we need to do as humans. And maybe that's the thing with AI. It starts to take over stuff that robots can do, and then maybe we'll bring out more of our humanity. I think it's you don't look convinced.
I think if even that, like what you touched on, is a very decolonial perspective, because that sense of urgency is something that we're wired to like need to have the answer. But the sense of urgency doesn't necessarily mean that it's truth. And I think that the more we kind of put on that decolonial perspective to be like, just because I got the response quickly doesn't mean it's truth. And I think that like with so AI being things that we put in, it's like we put in that the algorithms, and it's created by people that people have sometimes contested truths, right? And so I think that is a whole so I think that could be a very,
especially in our communities and what they say about us.
I love to see what people think. Like, I think it's really important for people to have platforms.
So you read the comments and stuff?
No, I don't got time for that. I'm talking about when people need to get their hate off. In public ways. And I think it's important. I want to know where the bigots are. I want to know why they're Zoom bombing us. You know what I'm saying? When taking the effort, and I get a little bit of pleasure out of that. I'm like, what basement are you in? Getting your thumbs off, talking like this. But it's interesting.
You got the Twitter gangsters up there.
When we use technology, it's interesting how it's used against us, or how people
That's
show
very
up
true. That's very
to
true.
continue
That's very true.
causing, historical harm. And it's just really fast.
It's still racialized violence and still racialized trauma, and doing that, perpetuating that stuff. And people feel because they're behind the screen, they can do that. And the unfortunate part of it now, I think, especially for younger people, is if you're hating on me at school, cool, I can go home. I don't have to see you. And I just know I'll deal with you when I go back. But now, you can be online, and you have to look at that mess not only 24/7, but it's there permanently. That does some serious damage to people.
They have group chats like fight clubs.
Are you serious?
That's chaos. That's chaos. So then, with that then, do you think that it should be like, should there be government intervention when it comes to AI, especially as it's growing? There's a lot of unknowns.
Yeah.
Should there be a bit more?
It's right now, I liken it to the Wild West. It's really hard because all of us are the first.
Truth.
And so you're trying to figure out what is all of this. And things like mental wellness impacts, physical health, we honestly won't know the real, I mean, we're learning the damage already now,
Yeah.
but really it's gonna be maybe 15, 20, 30, because it's not just what's happening in our minds, things about kids getting like arthritis type stuff in their thumb, you know, because they're doing this so much. And, you know, think about how often your neck, there's stuff going on with that. Like, so there's all sorts of pieces to that. So I think at some point it's gonna have to be, but how? And who's gonna determine that? Because depending on who's in that space, but I'm telling you, if you all, for example, Google bad hairstyles at work, our hair pops up. Our people pop up. So I'm still concerned around how are we going to stop perpetuating things like racism and sexism, et cetera, you know, in the AI world.
You mentioned hair, and I'm excited to get into that next time. But I feel like this topic is very big.
It is.
And I think we're going to
come
be
back to
revisiting it throughout because it's going to be impacting us. And we're learning as we go. I know we're not experts in it. But did anybody have a final thought that they wanted to share before we let Dr. G sign us off?
I mean, I'm excited about the future of it.
Yeah.
I think it's both extremely scary, but also super exciting. I think that the more people find ways to communicate in whatever way that looks like, I'm excited for. I think that the ways that we also hone in on decolonial, a critical decolonial perspective while we engage with these things, I think will be very pivotal as we move forward with AI and just communication.
I'm excited about the accessibility.
Yeah.
Just what can we do to bring people into our communities and how? That's my thought.
And I'm actually excited about finding that balance that will allow us to increase our humanity. And I really think that's what's going to happen, because wherever you are, you understand that there are certain things that make us uniquely human, right? So I get to do the thing.
Yeah, sound excited.
I want to thank you all again so much for joining us today on The Fam. And AI has nothing on hair. AI can't tell you what's going on here, but we can. And so I'm hoping you'll join us for our next episode, because we're going to have a little conversation about Black hair and what that means to us and our community, etc. So until that time, from our fam to yours, thank you so much for seeing us today.